in India. Right-wing parties opposed to a peace deal with the FARC won historic elections in Colombia on Sunday, but fell short of a majority in the polls that saw the former rebels enter Colombia's Congress. The hardliners' victory raises questions about the future of the peace agreement signed with President Juan Manuel Santos in November 2016. Santos says he's resuming peace talks with the nation's last remaining rebel group. He told the nation in a televised broadcast this Monday that he's sending his chief negotiator back to Ecuador for a new round of talks in belief that peace saves lives. Let's get the analysis. Daniel Lansberg Rodriguez joins us, Director for Latin America at Greenmantle. Good evening to you. What does this election result mean for the future of Colombia, in your view?
Well, Colombia is at a very interesting crossroads. It's sort of a moment, not just for Colombia, but for all of Latin America, in which outsiders are seen as the leaders of the upcoming generation. It's something that's not just happening in Colombia, it's also happening in Brazil. It's also happening in Mexico to a certain degree. And the actual political beliefs or leanings of the outsider candidates don't necessarily mean as much or aren't necessarily as predictive as the fact that they're seen as being somewhat outside of the establishment. Right now, the two leading candidates for the presidential elections in May are Iván Duque, who is the sort of leader now as of the primaries this week of the more center-right coalition, and Mr. Petro, who is the sort of leader of the left. The congressional gains that we saw weren't so much a sort of a surge of the Uribista or the group that is less excited about peace as they were a punishing of the status quo party, of Mr. Santos's party, who is currently at only around 20% generously in approval rating. So the center candidates are seen as somewhat weaker, and you have a focus more towards the bookends of the spectrum.
So how important is it that President Santos, who of course was feted by the Nobel Commission for his work in trying to get peace with the FARC, the fact he's now going to talk again with the ELN, the other remaining rebel group, how significant is this?
Well, right now, it's been difficult to really hammer down a lot of the agreements that were made during the initial peace deal that involved things like infrastructure, development of areas where the government had very little control previously. That's been slowed down considerably by opposition in the legislature and by sort of flagging approval of the president himself and a weakening political mandate. What we're seeing is essentially a party which knows it is most likely going to lose. It's trying to consolidate, trying to get as much done during the last few months as it can. And the ELN, which is the last remaining rebel group of any size, which is considerably smaller than the FARC, but is also one of the sort of three historical marquee groups, they still remain outside the process. Granted, the actual agreement, any sort of negotiation now has a bit of a pale over it, given the fact that while there's some uncertainty as to whether it can go to the left or more likely, I would think, the right, in as much as the peace process is concerned at the next election, that obviously complicates the ability of the government to make promises that they feel, that the rebels feel will be respected. That said, they're both very highly incentivized to try.
Daniel Lansberg Rodriguez, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Hubert, the